Good morning. Welcome to your first session. This is how student journey mapping can improve your institutional processes. This session will have 4 presenters. It's Kim Harvey-Manis, the Vice President of Student Services at Jefferson College, Joe Hawk, the Director of EMS Programs at Jefferson College, Bethany Pfeiffer, Boonville Site Director at State Fair Community College, and Alice Whalen, Adult Education Program Director at East Central College. Welcome.
Good morning. Thanks for joining our session on student journey mapping. We're excited to share with you kind of what we have learned in the last maybe 6 months about student journey mapping. The learning objectives for today are to understand basic student journey mapping concepts, to brainstorm student journey mapping allies and supporters at your institution and out in the community, to determine content areas that could be student journey mapping at your college, and then, if we have time, arranging 3 action steps that you plan to bring back to your college based on this presentation. So to provide a little context for today's session, the Missouri Department of Higher Education and Workforce Development had an increased focus on this over this past year on adult learners. They started an Adult Learners Collaborative, and they had higher ed institutions and professionals across the state engaged to learn how to better support and recruit and retain adult learners. So as part of that process, they invited institutions across the state to submit an application to participate in a student journey mapping workshop. So the 3 institutions here, East Central, State Fair, and Jefferson, were 3 of the institutions who were invited to participate in that process. So we each compiled a team of higher ed professionals, and we attended a workshop in Jeff City for 2 days in May of 2022. So I am going to turn it over to Joe to provide a brief overview of student journey mapping.
I like to pace, so I got to move this. Yeah, so I want to give you a good background on what this actually looks like, okay, how we go about this process and what it actually is, so then when you take this back, you can actually do it. So student journey mapping, at its root, the most important thing here is that it's student-focused, right? So while our processes play into it, it's about the student, and it's about their journey, the challenges they face, the obstacles in their way. And while we care about how we play into that, we keep it centered on the student. Okay, and then the other part of it is the visualization. So this is a way of taking a process and putting it out in front of us. So, we all have all these processes that we think we have these really great understandings of, but once you put them up, you visualize them, you can start seeing some obstacles or redundancies or whatever that are more difficult to really identify when we're just thinking about them. So once we can visualize it, it can make these processes a lot clearer, and we're able to identify these trouble points, these choke points, so that we can then better progress and fix these processes. So with journey mapping, what we want to do, we want to create a current state and a future state, meaning that we want to look at where we're at right now with this process, and then we want to look at where we're going, right? So what is the dream? What is the goal? In the ideal world, what would this process look like? So here's the current state map that we made, and Kim's going to talk a little more about our maps a little later on. But this is the one we made at the workshop. So this is kind of like the end goal here. So we visualized our process for enrollment of veterans, adult learners. And so as we started mapping this out, making connections, identifying decision points, so that's the kind of different shapes on there were our decision points, we started finding some things that are like, well, that seems a little odd. It seems like, for the student, right, because we're thinking about this from the student perspective, it seems like they might kind of struggle with this step. It seems easy and natural to us, but how does this work for the student? So there's our current state. So this is kind of the end goal. And then Alice is going to walk us through what kind of all this means.
All right. We have that pretty diagram. And so these things are what are included on that diagram. Talk about swim lanes. And the swim lanes are the people and the processes that you're going through. So it might be financial aid, it might be admissions, but it's these items on the left column, it's in those touch points that the student experiences. So you need to identify those, and that the students are often going to jump back and forth between those swim lanes. Get the right clicker going. Then you have to identify your process. Now, for a student, from the time they begin college till they end college is just too big a process. So you have to narrow it down, and you need to establish what your start point and end points are. You're mapping the processes in between, and you're going to go into a lot of detail, and that's what the next slide is about. And you also need to identify that technology. You know, when we went through this, we understood that we had to work with technology, but we didn't realize the impact that those changes in the technology were going to have on us, on the process. So make sure that you identify the technology, including the people that are in charge of the technology. You're looking at inputs and outputs. It's financial aid, it's those forms, and you know, they're digital or on paper anymore, but you need to know what processes and inputs and outputs, what reports do you need at the end that are included in your process. And also determining timing. One of the things we learned about in our workshop. Now, please understand, we're trying to tell you 2 days worth of workshop information in 40 minutes. Okay, so we are doing a quick overview. But determining the timing is important because oftentimes that's where your students have the biggest barrier. They go through a process, they do their input, and then what happens? They have to wait. So you need to identify the timing issues as well. And also your timing and implementation. When do you want to start? When do you want to end? And when are you going to begin making the changes in the process? And you don't get this pre-flow chart without having some other icons to go with it. And they were kind enough to provide us many. And there's lots of programs out there that you can access for this. Lucid chart. Okay, so that's what they used. But this is very familiar. If you ever took a basic programming class in high school, this all looked very familiar to me. But looking at making it pretty is one thing, and that's not your first goal. But that's the end goal, is having something that you can work with and share and saying, okay, this is what we've come with, and being able to make those changes. Again, looking at these decision points, delays or wait time, systems and generated reports, all of those things that it's really, really easy to get lost in the weeds. And there will be a time for that. And these are the tools you're going to have to use that. But back up, and we're going to talk about the overall process first. But these things are included in this slide, so for you. Back to Joe.
Yeah, so as Alice was saying, we spent 2 full days doing some really intense work on all of this stuff. So I was trying to cram this in 40 minutes or so and expecting you guys to retain. It's pretty brutal. So what I want to do is just like a really simple process. Walk you guys through so you can kind of see what goes into making these current state maps and future state maps, and then you can take it back and then do all your complex stuff once we get back. So what I want to look at is my my wake-up process, essentially. And so what I identified was I got 3 swim lanes, okay? So there are 3 people involved in this process, or 3 entities. So it's me, my wife, and my children. So first thing I do, and I'm sure quite a few of you relate, very satisfying, I wake up, I slap my alarm at least 3 times, right? I'm sure a couple of you do that as well. So I preset my alarm, so I set it for like half hour before I actually want to get up because I know I'm going to slap it over and over again. All right? Then from there, I'm going to take a shower. You're welcome. And then I've got to make a decision. Okay, I've got to decide, do I want to wake my wife up and say goodbye to her and risk her wrath for waking her up? Or do I just want to leave and risk her wrath for not saying goodbye, right? So I've got a decision to make there. And then my kids are fighting, inevitably, so I've got to deal with that, you know, on my way out the door. Then get in my car, and then inevitably I forget my lunch. My wife's going to run it out to me, and another bit of a delay there. So looking at that, so that's my current state, right? Here's where I'm at right now. So looking at that, and there's the interactive part, what do you guys think? What barriers are there? What redundancies? Where's the wasted time?
Wasted time is your alarm.
Okay, wasting time with my alarm. Seems like a silly thing just to slap it over and over again. Sure. Yeah, having to make that decision every morning it's traumatizing. No matter what, I'm wrong. It's horrible. And then what happens is then if I wake her up, my wife smacks me like I'm the alarm. Okay, sorry. Yeah. Okay. Anything else on there? Forgetting my lunch. That just seems silly, especially if I do it every day, right? That's a pattern there. Okay. So what do you guys think about solutions? So that's the second part of it. So we identify, okay, our current state's not ideal. So now we need to identify, okay, what do I want my future state to look like? So what do y'all think? Where are the fixes here? What can I do to clean this up? Any ideas? So I keep forgetting my lunch. What do you guys think? Prepare the night before? Yeah? Okay. How about my children? Any ideas there? I'm serious. It's a problem. Anyone? No, yeah. Fair enough. Yeah, we've been racking our brains. We have yet to figure that one out. How about the alarm?
Set it for the correct time.
Maybe set for the correct time? Here's a very novel idea I came up with. Maybe I could go to bed at a reasonable hour, I don't know. Thinking ahead here. So, okay, so here's, still looking at my current state, but here's some of the solutions I identified. I'm going to set my alarm for that realistic time. I'm also going to go to bed early, like the adult I am, right? I am still going to shower, keeping that one in there, all right? And then I'm going to have a conversation with my wife. We're going to talk about this ahead of time. That way I'm not playing this guessing game every morning, right? My kids, you'll love this. I'm going to make a policy. No disputes before 8 a.m. They're going to adhere to it. They're like, okay, Dad, there's a policy in place. Sorry about that, Father. So, yeah, that's going to work, I'm sure. Get my car, and then as far as the lunch goes, maybe I'll set an alarm on my phone, a reminder on my phone, or maybe a Post-it note with my car keys or something to remind me to grab my lunch before I walk out. Okay, so then when I'm looking at my future state, here it is, right? My alarm goes off, I get up, I shower, I'm going to say goodbye to my wife. We talked about it. She wants me to wake her up. And then simultaneously, I'm going to say goodbye to my children. They're going to be standing there in their church clothes, like, goodbye, Father, dearest, all prim and proper, because I have a policy in place, so we're ready. And then I'm just going to get in my car, I'm going to leave, I'm going to go to work, right? So there's my future state. So, looking at these processes, this is the whole idea, identifying where those hurdles are, those redundancies, the wasted time, and then ideally this is where I want to be. This is my future state. One more. Whew. There we go. Okay. Kim.
Okay, now I'm going to talk about Jefferson College's experience with student journey mapping. So what we decided to focus on is identifying barriers for student veterans and those students who are using veterans' educational benefits, children, for example, of veterans. The composition of our team, I served as our team lead. We also had our director of admissions. We had an admissions representative who focused on adult learners. We had a financial aid advisor, and she also was an adult learner herself. We had our director of EMS programs, Joe. We had our assistant registrar and VA certifying official, and then our director of workforce and employment services. So that was kind of our team. I will say one of the lessons learned from us, which I'll say later on, is that we really need to make sure we have all the team members we need. We quickly discovered we were missing an advising piece, so that was kind of a lesson learned. We spent a lot of time at the workshop, as Joe mentioned, focusing on the current and future state maps. And I think Alice mentioned about getting down in the weeds. That's another lesson learned. There's a few of us who are really detail-oriented. We wanted to address every last piece of it. That didn't work out so well. We needed to focus on the process as a whole. We needed to hone in kind of on a specific process for our future state. We couldn't recreate the whole current state map. That wasn't going to happen. And then in terms of future state ideas, we quickly identified some barriers for student veterans and possibly for adult learners in general. One of the things we determined is that we don't identify those student veterans or those using veterans educational benefits up front. Therefore, we're not able to proactively communicate with them. That's one of the things we have been learning. We did some focus groups and some student surveys, and veterans needed more guidance about how to go through the VA certifying process, and we weren't doing that. We were being reactive when they reached out, so that was a big gotcha for us as we were going through the process. So for some of our future state ideas, we talked about adding a question to our admissions application, identifying if a student is going to use veterans educational benefits. We talked about creating a welcome event, doing more proactive communication, assigning an individualized support team to each veteran. And then before we left the workshop, we were asked to create an implementation plan. So our implementation plan, we already started scheduling future meetings, so we would get back on campus and kind of keep the momentum going. We also talked about doing the welcome event. As I mentioned, the individualized support teams. We talked about doing a campus-wide retreat. We really wanted to get others involved across campus to look at our current map, our future map, also look at our future plans and give us feedback on them. We also went ahead and started scheduling dates for different things. We needed to stay on top of this so we didn't get back to campus kind of in the day-to-day and let this get lost. So as Joe showed this earlier, this is our current state map. You can see our different swim lanes: admissions, financial aid, testing center, academic success center, registrar, advising, and the program. So we were really looking at when students get admitted into the college, kind of the general admissions, how they get through advising, financial aid, VA certifying official, and then how ultimately they get into Joe's programs, the EMT or EMT paramedic program. What was interesting for us is Joe was not necessarily familiar with the general admissions process because he focuses specifically on EMT and he's at a satellite location. So he was looking at our process going, what about this? What about that? We did the same thing to his specialized admission. So we learned a lot just within the institution about this. So as I said, what we decided to focus on the current state is this point of admission. We wanted to address many, many things, but we really had to focus in. So we chose here, and we added another decision point here, and it's basically, are they a veteran or not? If they're a veteran, we will then do some initial outreach. The VA will reach out, the support team will reach out, we'll plan a welcome event, maybe we'll do a student club. So this is just a small piece. Like I said, we couldn't bite off the whole thing. We really wanted to, but just for the 2-day workshop, this is kind of the area we focused on. And as they said earlier, we ended up digitizing our maps, and we had good success using Lucidchart. Okay, so creation of a task force. When we got back from the state workshop, one of the first things we did is create a task force, and it was all the members who participated in the workshop along with the advising specialists that we added. We created a list of action items. There was a lot of things that we determined that we needed to do, and we wanted to keep track of our progress and the different tasks that we were doing. One of the action items was, doing that outreach. Another action item was doing that campus retreat. And that was really what we spent our summer doing, as planning for that campus-wide retreat. We had, about 30 individuals who participated, faculty and staff from all areas of campus. Our goal was to introduce student journey mapping. What is it? How can you use it in your department? We wanted to share with them our current state and future state maps and get feedback from them. We wanted to share our future plans and just see if people agreed with them or had other ideas. We also began collecting data on success rates of student veterans, how many student veterans may have applied but never enrolled, how many tested in our testing center and then never enrolled. So we are identifying other gaps that we could pursue later on. Let's see. So we also did our student journey campus retreat. As I said, we had quite a few people for that, and it really got people engaged. There was many individuals who walked away from that saying they really wanted to do student journey mapping for their departments. We did a lot of data collection kind of before and after. We talked to student veterans and those using veterans educational benefits through surveys and focus groups. So that was very interesting. We didn't have a huge response rate, but the responses were consistent and honestly different than what we were planning. We thought a welcome event would be great. Here's who you can meet everybody at campus. And they're like, no, we're not interested. We thought developing a team of individuals to support them would be great. And they said, no, we want one person to talk to us. We also had a student recommend we could do a veterans club. Some people were for that, others were not. They're like, we don't have any additional time. We have families, we have a lot of things going on, so we have to consider that. So the purpose, as we have said, is this is really focusing on the student, and it really reinforced the value of the student feedback to make that process better for the student. We ended up in the summer and fall doing some additional campus retreats. We had 4 different areas on campus who do quite a bit of recruitment. So our admissions department, our area technical school, adult ed and literacy, and then workforce and employment services. So we got them together and found really, as we mapped out the recruitment process, there was a lot of duplicating going on. So that's something we're working on to improve that process. We also looked at returning learners. What is the process for a returning learner to be admitted, get financial aid, and be enrolled? And we've identified some barriers for that we're working on as well. So in terms of lessons learned from Jefferson, one of the things is keep the momentum going. We've been successful just because we were excited coming back from the workshop. We wanted to share the word. We could have easily gotten back and just went back to our day-to-day, but we kind of kept the momentum going with that. Also, as you're planning for your future state, don't think about all the barriers. That was one of the things Joe said, oh, money's no object. We can do what we want. And then our VP of Finance was like, no, hold on. So we were really looking at what will make the process better. Then we can talk more about the institutional buy-in, the impact on policies and procedures. What are the financial implications? I'm trying to think of our other ones. Joe? Yep, student-centered. One of the things, as I mentioned earlier, we were going through the process and we were kind of, I don't want to say nitpicking, but asking questions on like his process and our process. And if it's confusing to us as higher ed professionals, we need to consider what that will look like for a student. Obviously, it's going to be challenging and they'd very well be kind of walking away. So keeping that student perspective in mind. We also talked about as one of our action items, trying to shadow a student through the admissions, through enrollment process, just to see what it's like. So lots of lessons learned. That's kind of like the top 3 that we learned. So I am going to turn it over to Alice now.
Thank you. Hello again. I am the Director for Adult Education and Literacy at East Central College, and we participated in the journey mapping process for the purpose of integrating our student processes with the college's student processes. Now, that may not seem like too big a project to think about, but our program is in 5 counties. I have 13 class sites. 11 of those are off-campus sites, and we serve about 400 students a year. And we're DESE funded. We have an AEL grant, which means we also have a DESE requirement for our own database. We have our own admissions forms. We have our own enrollment form. We have, everything was independent. And so when we talked about how can we integrate this with East Central College's processes and make our students East Central College students, we had no idea how big a deal it was going to be, but we got the right people at the table. We have the Director of Admissions, our Vice President of Student Services, Sarah Leisner, was there. We had a faculty member. We had 2 academic deans. We had my assistant, our college and career readiness advocate was there. We even had a business leader from the community that we had partnered with our English language classes. Now, adult education literacy, high school equivalency, and English language classes. What we did not have was a high school equivalency student or an English language student. But we know that is something that if we could go back and change it, we would have loved to have had one of our students participating. One group that was missing from this, and I referred to this earlier, was the technology group. And everybody understood the process. We knew we'd have to fill out the ECC admission form. But then when it came to finding out the data that needed to be not on the, in the admissions form because it was a DESE requirement, not an ECC requirement. So that enrollment form had to be changed with the admissions form, because the last thing you want to do is to make a student fill out 2 admissions forms, because again, we're trying to be student focused. And then having the current state and working with it that way, and it's like, okay, talking about getting in the weeds, here's all our little yellow Post-its and all the technology. And how many technology pieces do you touch just getting a student through the process? And then the swim lanes, and you can't see them quite as clearly, but there's adult education. We wanted to connect them to the college's resources. We were in the process of hiring an occupational navigator and a wellness navigator, which is for social services support to help students get enrolled in any financial and other assistance they might need. And making it seamless for them, for an adult ed student to become an ECC student, but they don't need to do financial aid yet. But having them getting prepared for that. And so it was integrating all these systems. But we also know that if we could get more of those services, like the wellness and the occupation, giving them a career goal, giving them financial support, that would not just help them get through to college, but staying in our program. If you have an adult education program, the turnover could be pretty high. We might have 400 students, but we'll probably have 40 graduates. But we also know that only 20% of those graduates were going on to college at ECC, and we wanted to change that. So our hope is, now that we've done this, can we get more students to stay in our program longer, get more graduates? They're in the ECC systems, they have an ECC email, they've gotten into Canvas, we've helped them learn all those things. Will they then be more likely to become an ECC student? We did learn that probably the hardest technology step is getting new student email set up. But we've had our teachers doing that. But then teaching our teachers. They're in off-site locations in Herman and Montgomery City, so we're not only in Union or Rolla at the ECC campuses. So even now, we're still going through this process, but 6 months later, all of our students are doing an ECC admission form. All of our students are getting an ECC email address. They can get that ID. We're referring them for occupational services as well as the social services. And that's what it's about, is getting the students supported and looking at the way that they are going through this process. One of the things that we don't have yet is this inventory on the impact of change, but we're 6 months in, and I think that by the end of this fiscal year, we'll be able to look and see how much change how much impact did the changes have, and have the students been able to stay in classes longer and persisted better and received more support. We're also looking to add that student voice, as I mentioned, and get the technology team into the meetings right away. And now to State Fair. Here you go, Bethany. Thank you.
So with State Fair Community College, we chose to focus on two underserved populations in the Sedalia area, primarily the Ukrainian population and Hispanic population. We found that they were not represented at State Fair, and they were a large part of our community. So we actually invited 2 members from each of those groups to the student journey mapping. So they had no higher ed experience. They provided some great insight just into an outsider's perspective. They both had some involvement with State Fair. One, Blue, our Hispanic representative, he showed up and tried to reserve our soccer space and ended up in the financial aid department somehow. So we talked with marketing about getting some signs put up. So just even in this first day meeting, we hadn't even put any Post-it notes out, and we were already making really positive changes. With our Ukrainian representative, he's now one of our CDL instructors. So although we are not as far as East Central and Jefferson College in the student journey mapping piece, we've already implemented some really positive steps that resulted from this awesome workshop. As I mentioned, just the great participation, great feedback. We also noticed that we took out some of the personalization that was in our admissions process when we implemented Slate. I don't know if many of you are using that as well at your college. So I guess both members mentioned that, we're not going to be checking our emails if they were going through our admissions process. So that's where we added in our advisors to make those personal calls and connections earlier, rather than waiting until students got admitted and they somehow scheduled their enrollment appointment all on their own without any help, right? No one does that. So we brought that personal piece forward because our admissions team was short-staffed, just like everyone is. So the more people we added to the process just really helped make it more personal. It kind of made the process a little smoother, and it helped get more stakeholders and input and just understanding of what the actual process was like. When we laid out the admissions process, from the minute someone's a prospective student all the way through actually applying and getting their testing appointment and whatnot, financial aid said, wow, how do we get anyone through this process? Because it is kind of complicated, right? So we mapped it from the perspective or an adult student, so we didn't even touch dual credit, don't get me started. But our goal is that I really think we could even expand this to adult ed, just like what Alice is doing at East Central. I think we could expand this into our non-credit side with the Learning Force. I think we could even do this separately from when a student is enrolled all the way through graduation and transferring or working, applying for jobs. So I really think this whole process can be used in just about every facet of your job within the community college setting and really life. I've thought about, doing it at home, trying to figure out how I can streamline some of my own personal processes in the morning. I do think as I mentioned, we relied too much on automatic emails. We've had some positive from the workshop, but then I felt like we had enough buy-in from everybody, but then we mentioned as you get busy, you really have to have those meetings set up so that you can continue to make progress in this process, because otherwise you do just kind of go back to working day to day, doing your same old thing. So I think that at least forces everyone to keep it on the forefront of their mind. We have brought in an outside consultant to do a process analysis. So we've really dug into the weeds, and that's where I love to stay, just in the weeds, working out the specific process and each step, trying to eliminate barriers as much as we can for our students. So hopefully, whenever we are fully staffed, we can actually finish and get to our future state, and that's our goal, right? So as you can see, it was utter chaos in the beginning. We did eventually streamline it, and then here's where, truly our future state, we were going to map this out for each of these other areas: adult education, the non-credit learning force is what we call it, and then dual credit, where we could streamline each process, but all in the same system. So they are getting the similar communication, so they do have access, and then maybe we could turn some adult education graduates into State Fair Community College, first-time freshmen, and continuing education. There's our group. So I think, how are we doing on time? What do you think?
14 minutes.
Okay, so we were going to do kind of a breakout session, a discussion. Trying to think if we should have everyone group up, or what do you think? Yeah, okay. So does anyone want to volunteer a problem at your college right now that you are considering working on? You've had some ideas from us, so we took some different underserved populations. We took adult education. We took veterans. Anybody looking at similar groups or problems at your schools, or you're all working perfectly, you don't need this, you're here to teach us actually what we should be doing instead? Yeah.
So this is probably more of a question.
Mm-hmm.
Student focus, great. One of the things that, in my capacity, that we kind of struggle with is that new faculty onboarding, and they have to be ready to meet those students where they are, things like that. There are a lot of technology touch points for them. Were any of the groups in your mapping process looking at that onboarding faculty process?
We did not.
I've been doing it for my high school equivalency in English language instructors. And actually, one of the things I've done is created a Canvas course for our instructors that walks them through the onboarding steps. Kind of keeps us accountable, and they submit assignments, and they go through the process a lot like a student would. But that's what we've done. I think one of the things you have to watch for is just, again, keeping it a big picture and not creating more processes that create more barriers. So it's detailed, but keep it simple.
Yeah, so that's part of what's so neat about this process is that it's really versatile, and it can be applied to essentially any process, right? My morning wake-up routine. I think the big thing is even if it's not students, you have to keep in mind who your participant is, right? Who's the root of it. And so if we're trying to make it easier for faculty, then we need to think about that faculty person's journey through this process. Where are they struggling? Where are their obstacles? And then what is our part in that? And then even, so what I found interesting also is that, we look at these processes, we're like, this is a strange process, this is a difficult process, well, let's map it, find the issues. But also, so on our map, down the bottom there was my process for the paramedic program, which makes sense to me. I'm like, it's perfect, it's great, we are only doing it because it was part of our workshop, it's fine, don't touch it, leave it alone, right? And then we start going through it, and Kim's like, Joe, what are you doing? I'm like, I don't know, Kim, So I actually, I'm looking at kind of revamping my own process, which I thought was pristine. And then we did this, and it's like, oh, that's embarrassing, right? So that's what's really neat about this whole thing is that kind of versatility and can be applied almost any process. As long as, once again, you keep in mind that who is our focus in this process, or what is our focus.
And the only thing I would add to that is make sure you get the faculty voice in that. Have somebody who's brand new onboarding, because like I said, we came up with a lot of great ideas, and some of them we will go forward with, but when we started talking to the population of students this would affect, they had completely different ideas than we did, so.
Anyone else got any thoughts on any processes that you guys might like to explore? Anyone, has anyone implemented something like this at their organization? Yeah?
We kind of stumbled into this about a year ago,
Sure.
and literally stumbled into it. I wish we had been intentional and brilliant doing it. We had, did anybody have some turnover on their staff recently? And then trying to find new people and get them to come to work, and then waiting for folks to show up. And so, oh yeah, what do we do with them when HR gets done with them? How do we integrate them back into working in the division? And we found out that as we added advisors, financial aid staff, admissions staff, whatever, we needed a coherent process to walk them through after they got the HR paperwork done about what goes on like this. And, you know, bless her heart, my administrative assistant sat down after about the third one, I've had it, and went into my conference room with me and wrote it all out on whiteboards.
There you go,
And then,
yeah.
You know, I thought, Lord, this is amazing. So she created this massive flow chart every time we add somebody in the division now, how we go step by step by step, making sure IT gets done, making sure this gets done, everything. And every time we add somebody, but it was by accident. And I asked her, and then she pulled out a book on mapping.
Yeah.
She showed it to me and said, "You better read this."
There you go. Yeah, it's an incredible process, and
Now it is.
for sure.
And
And
worked real well for adding new folks. That's it, beyond the HR part, when you integrate them into the division. So that was
And a lot of these processes are going to create more work on the back end. It's unavoidable because you are trying to simplify things for your student. And in these conversations that we had at the workshop, it was easy to get bogged down into, well, so-and-so's not going to like this, and they're never going to allow that. And you just have to plow through it. You just have, you know what? This is the process that we're looking at. We'll deal with whoever or whatever when it gets there. This is what we need to implement. So it becomes about serving the student or the new faculty member or teacher, but having that focus and maintaining it sometimes does mean more work on the back end, and those internal struggles on how to balance those things are still going to continue, but the end result is going to be much better, I think.
And I will say, stay hopeful. Sometimes people resign and retire, so it may open up opportunities for you. So this was our group sharing idea, just brainstorming at least 3 ideas that you plan to take back with you, what kind of team you would assemble, what stakeholders you'd have to put together, kind of learn from our mistakes. If we forgot someone, make sure you include them in your group. I think that's the most important part, because then you're asking questions that you don't have anyone in the room to answer. At least you won't be in Jeff City when you do it, but you could just run down the hall and grab them, I guess.
Yeah, I have a question about like the actual process of making this happen. So as you look back on each of you and how you got to this point, are there ways that you could have made it more efficient? Did it require all of the whole group to meet all the time? Or as you lay out those maps, does your admissions staff come in and say, these are the things that we do, and then the next person comes in, so that you're not all, I'm trying to think like, how do you pull all those people together?
Right, logistically. Yeah. I'll say for us, it was really nice in the beginning so that financial aid knew what the actual admissions process looked like. And then afterwards, she was like, okay, I understand it's complicated. Let me get out of here. And I would say you could then hone it down into just the key folks. And that's what we've done with our outside process analysis guy. We have kind of stripped away some of the people who didn't really need to be there anymore and have gotten really specific on the process. So maybe it's been different for you guys.
It was messy. That first day, we had 7 or 8 people there and from all different functions. And you have to have the right balance of people. We talked yesterday about you need somebody that's got the big picture idea, you need that detail person, and you need somebody in the middle going, hey, come back over here. Quit getting lost over there. You need to come out of the clouds. But at the same time, we also had, 4 or 5 different pockets of conversation going on, and they were all asking questions. Now, I'm one of those people, I can look and listen and hear all 5, but I had somebody else going, what are we doing? Aren't you going to bring them back together, or shouldn't we be doing this? And I'm like, it's okay. But those conversations had to happen that way so that they could each process what their own need was. So yeah, it can be a little messy and a little bit of chaotic, but you do, if you have that somebody that can let that go on for a minute and then bring it back together, and it's still an important part of the process so that they each have that time to process what is happening.
Ditto.
I would say for me, when we went to the state workshop, it would have been nice if we had some planning done before that. We had been given some stuff on student journey mapping to learn about it, but I'm one of those detailed people. I would rather have mapped out some of it to get us started, and then instead of starting from scratch. So some pre-work before you get all your pieces together, I think would be very beneficial. And even though we had like admissions and financial aid and registrar, we collectively worked together because we work kind of as a one-stop shop at the college. So we didn't have admissions, you do this piece, you do that, because we work pretty well together, and that worked good for us.
We had a couple false starts too, so it's okay. Try it again. We had a couple false starts too, so it's okay if you have to start over and just rethink. Yeah.
You all spoke about keeping students in mind and working with adult learners and bringing them into the conversation. I wonder if you could just quickly speak to what their thoughts were about this process. I mean, they probably have families, they're working, and they're being vulnerable by coming back to your institutions. So how was this process for them? Was it as seamless as you hoped?
Well, and I did mean to mention that. I think someone said it would have been nice to have a student there. And for us, I probably wasn't going to bring a student to Jeff City, but we're going to involve them more on the college side now that we're in there and do some just group discussion and figure out how did that process work for you. I do that personally just at the Boonville campus, one-on-one, because I have that personal connection with students. So my perspective is probably different than a college-wide perspective.
Well, and ours was unique because we were bringing 2 very independent systems together. And I agree. I think that's why I didn't bring a student, was because it was in Jeff City and we were going to be there for 2 days. That was a barrier. But now that we're back, being able, and if we were doing it on campus, to say, okay, this is what we're talking about doing. For us, the experience being so different probably wouldn't have made sense to that student to begin with. It now is probably appropriate that we would ask a student, how is this process going for you? And they're brand new. They don't know what the old process was. So, that's our next evaluation.
Yeah, so do you have a question? Yeah.
I just wanted to say, Laney and Clark with Three Rivers College, because we were supposed to speak today as well, but we've had some position changes, and I was really worried that our process wasn't near far along enough to present today. But I'm actually thrilled because I feel better now knowing, that we were pretty well. But we did do non-credit, and we brought our stakeholders in, and we did have a student. And it was great to have the student in there.
Sure.
Because he has been a student for a while, so he knows how it was and and he was intricate in helping us get to our current state, our future state, sorry. And so we found about 3 stoppages, and so we are almost completely through developing the first stoppage, and then we'll move on. So, honestly, it does make me feel better, but I feel better.
Yeah.
All right.
We're just admitting it's
So it's nice that we're all about the same, spot. So I was just really concerned that I was really.
it doesn't happen in 6 months.
No,
It's a
has
process,
not.
yeah.
So I'm learning that, but the student was very, and doing the non-credit is, because I'm on the workforce side, and it's very interesting. University.
Sure. So we did some focus groups with students and talked about this process and whatnot. And as we showed this to students, I think this is where it's valuable. I was involved in this process as well because we were looking at the student services process, which I know like nothing about. Right? I know a little more now than I did. Right? But as we're going through this, they're using all this terminology, and I'm like, I have no clue what you're talking about. Right? If I don't know in higher education, what's the student? They have no idea. And so then when we did some of the focus groups and we were like talking through some of this, so one point that looked a little confused. I'm like, do you have any idea what we're talking about? They're like, I have no clue, right? So that student perspective is incredibly valuable to get in there at some stage. The initial stage may be hard when we're kind of formulating what is our process, right? But once we have something on paper, I think it was incredibly valuable.
We had 2 employers there too as well. So
Yeah.
a student and 2 employers and then the staff that were involved from the college.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Any, yeah?
Are you tracking and measuring the success with the changes that you have?
One more time. I'm sorry, sir.
Are you tracking and measuring success with some of the changes that you've implemented, especially when we talk about some of those different segments and those swim lanes?
That's an incredible question for Kim.
We are not far enough along, but some of the data we've collected in advance is like the retention rate, the persistence rate, how many go through kind of the admissions process and test and then don't ever enroll in classes. So one of the things we are now identifying, veterans or those using benefits up front so we can begin that outreach. So I think it'll be 2 or 3 years before we kind of actually have the data. So the pre-data is very helpful, and that was one of the things we've been focusing on is what additional data can we collect to determine kind of the impact it's having. So.
Absolutely. Do you guys have like intermediary milestones and different things that you're kind of going back to that tracking factor, right? Just to show the case that we're doing the right things?
Well, no, I think what's interesting is, I said the process we wanted is kind of not what the students wanted, but there's difference between Joe's programs, our cohort programs, and the campus I'm at. They're taking different courses. But, ultimately, when we're hearing they want that one person, I'm thinking down the line for strategic workforce planning, are we asking for one person to serve veterans down the line? So, but we don't necessarily have milestones. I think we're ultimately going to be recommending how we could make the process better, and that might include personnel as well. So I think we're right at our 9:30 mark.
Oh, okay.
Any final questions?
Thank you all for coming in and listening. Appreciate it.